flowers on her grave were still fresh when he filed the life insurance claim. Didn't wait a week. Didn't wait for the sympathy cards to stop arriving. 48 hours after they put his wife in the ground, Dr. James Whitfield picked up the phone and called his insurance company. $2.4 million. And the most terrifying part, nobody thought that was strange. Because James Whitfield was a doctor, a respected one, a man who had spent 20 years healing people in a small Virginia town that trusted him completely. But the medical examiner who signed the death certificate was about to get a phone call that would change everything. And by the time the truth came out, the whole town would realize they had been trusting a monster. Millbrook, Virginia, June 2020. Population 12,000. One Main Street. One hospital. One man everybody called when they were scared. Dr. James Whitfield was 47, cardiologist, 18 years at Millbrook. General, the kind of doctor who remembered his patients, kids' names, and called personally with test results instead of leaving a voicemail. His wife, Sandra, was 44, former nurse, retired when their daughter was born. Spent her days volunteering at the local food bank and growing tomatoes in the backyard. By every visible measure, they were a happy couple. But money tells the truth that faces hide. 3 months before Sandra died, the Whitfields were quietly drowning in debt. A failed real estate investment in 2018 had wiped out their savings. James had taken out 2 personal loans totaling $380,000, credit card debt approaching. And then, 8 months before Sandra's death, James had increased her life insurance policy. Sandra had signed the paperwork without question. She trusted her husband. That trust cost her everything. On June 14th, 2020, Sandra Whitfield was found unresponsive in the master bathroom of their home by her husband at 6:45 a.m. James called 911 immediately, was calm on the recording, gave clear information, said she had a history of heart palpitations, which her medical records confirmed. Paramedics arrived in 8 minutes, could not revive her. The attending physician at Millbrook General, a colleague of James for over a decade, signed the death certificate without hesitation. Cause of death, cardiac arrhythmia. Natural causes. The funeral was held 4 days later. James wept at the service. Their teenage daughter held his hand throughout. The entire town came out to pay their respects. And then 48 hours later, James called the insurance company. The claims processor flagged it internally, not because it was illegal, but because the speed was unusual. She mentioned it to her supervisor. Her supervisor noted it, and then forwarded the file, almost as a formality, to their in-house fraud investigation team. That forwarded email was the first domino. The insurance company's investigator was a former homicide detective named Carl Briggs. Carl had seen a lot of quick claims. Most had innocent explanations, grieving people who needed money fast, medical bills piling up, financial pressure. But something about this file made him read it twice. He requested Sandra's full medical history. Healthy, remarkably so. Annual checkups, clean for 6 consecutive years. The heart palpitations James had mentioned to paramedics listed once in her file. A minor notation from 2016, nothing serious, nothing that suggested a fatal cardiac event at 44 years old. Carl contacted the Virginia Medical Examiner's office and requested a second autopsy. It took 3 weeks to get approval, but what the forensic pathologist found in that second examination changed everything. Trace amounts of potassium chloride detected in tissue samples that had been preserved during the initial examination, a compound that in high doses causes cardiac arrest and in a normal autopsy is almost impossible to detect because the body naturally contains potassium. Almost impossible, not completely impossible. The forensic pathologist had been specifically looking for it. Someone with medical knowledge had known exactly how much to use, had known exactly how the body would process it, had known that in a standard small-town autopsy, nobody would ever think to test for it. Only a doctor would know all of that. With the toxicology report in hand, Virginia State Police opened a formal homicide investigation. A search warrant was executed on the Whitfield home on August 3, 2020. In James's home office, inside a locked drawer, investigators found a medical journal, flagged on a specific page, an article from 2014 discussing potassium chloride as a method of untraceable cardiac induction. The page had been folded down at the corner, highlighted in yellow. In James's own handwriting, in the margin 3 words, "Check the dosage," in his hospital locker, a vial partial logged out of the hospital pharmacy 6 weeks before Sandra's death under a patient file that investigators determined had been falsified. James Whitfield was arrested on August 9, 2020 at Millbrook General Hospital. Mid-shift, in front of colleagues he had worked alongside for nearly 2 decades, he said nothing as they walked him out. The trial lasted 11 days. The defense argued the potassium findings were inconclusive, that the highlighted article proved curiosity, not intent, that a grieving man filing an insurance claim quickly was not evidence of murder. The prosecution put Carl Briggs on the stand, the forensic pathologist, the pharmacy records manager, and finally Sandra's sister, who testified that Sandra had called her 2 weeks before her death and said quietly, "I think James is hiding something from me. I don't know what, but something feels wrong." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty, first-degree murder. Guilty, insurance fraud. Guilty, falsifying medical records. Dr. James Whitfield was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As the sentence was read, his daughter stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking at him. She never looked back. Sandra Whitfield grew tomatoes in her backyard, volunteered at the food bank every Thursday, called her sister every Sunday without fail. She had no idea that the man who took her pulse knew exactly how to stop it. The most chilling detail investigators took from this case wasn't the highlighted journal, wasn't the falsified pharmacy records, wasn't even the insurance claim filed 48 hours after the funeral. It was something Carl Briggs said in an interview after the verdict. He said James Whitfield would have gotten away with it completely if one claims processor hadn't found the timing unusual enough to mention to her supervisor. One person, one conversation, one forwarded email. That's the only reason Sandra Whitfield got justice. Sometimes that's all that stands between a perfect crime and the truth. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. New true crime every week. And tell me in the comments at what point did you realize James was guilty?